The photograph arrived on the morning of my engagement party. A single image slid beneath my bedroom door, showing my fiancé's hand intertwined with another woman's, their matching rings catching the light. I held it between my fingers, studying the timestamp. 2 days ago. The trembling I'd expected didn't come. Instead, something cold and crystalline settled in my chest, sharp as broken glass. Downstairs, my stepmother Vivienne hummed while arranging white roses in the ballroom. The same tune she'd hummed the day my mother died. The same tune she'd hummed at my father's funeral 6 months later. The same tune that had haunted every moment of loss in my 23 years. I descended the stairs slowly, the photograph now tucked in my purse, and watched her work. She looked up with that practiced smile, the one that fooled everyone, the one magazines called maternal grace when they photographed us together. "Catherine, darling, you're pale. Wedding nerves?" Her voice dripped with false concern. "Perhaps," I said, my tone even. "Or perhaps I'm finally seeing clearly." Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or warning. But she returned to her roses. She didn't know yet that this would be the last day she'd ever hum that tune in my presence. I hadn't always known what she was. For years, I'd thought myself cursed by fate, by bad luck, by the universe's casual cruelty. My mother's sudden heart attack when I was 7. My father's stroke at my 16th birthday party. My grandmother's mysterious fall downstairs she'd climbed safely for 40 years. The scholarship I'd inexplicably lost to a student with lower grades. The job offers that vanished between interview and contract. The friends who drifted away after strange dreams warned them against me. Vivienne had married my father when I was 5, a widow with sad eyes and a talent for arriving just when we needed someone. She'd been patient, loving even in those early years. She'd braided my hair and read me stories, called me her little blessing. My mother had trusted her completely. They'd been friends since college, sisters in all but blood. That trust had been the weapon that killed her. I didn't learn the truth until I was dying, my body finally surrendering to the slow poison she'd been feeding me for 18 years. It was in the hospital room, machines beeping their countdown, that I saw her mask slip. She sat beside my bed, reading a magazine while my organs failed, and when the nurse stepped out, she leaned close. "You were always too much like your mother," she whispered. "Too bright, too loved, too everything. Do you know what it's like to stand in someone's shadow for 20 years? To watch your friend have everything, the career, the man, the perfect child, while you scrape by on sympathy and borrowed time?" Her fingers traced the edge of my blanket, almost tender. "The curse was so simple, Catherine. A strand of your mother's hair, a photograph, some herbs I grew in the garden. Your father never questioned why I wanted to plant nightshade. He thought I was cultivating beauty." She laughed soft and musical. And I was, in a way, the beauty of erasure, the beauty of becoming. I tried to speak, but my throat had closed. She patted my hand. "You'll be with them soon. Your mother, your father, everyone who loved you more than they ever loved me. And I'll finally have what should have been mine from the beginning. The estate, the company, the legacy, all of it." She stood smoothing her designer dress. "The doctors will say it was genetic. Heart problems just like your mother. They'll say you were fragile all along." My vision darkened. The machine screamed. And in that final moment, something inside me screamed back. A rage so pure, it burned away everything else. I refused. I rejected. I demanded one more chance. The universe impossibly answered. I woke up to sunlight streaming through familiar curtains, the scent of honeysuckle from the garden, and my mother's voice calling me for breakfast. When I stumbled to the mirror, a 13-year-old face stared back at me. Younger, healthier, alive. The date on my phone confirmed it. 10 years before my death. 10 years before Vivienne's poison finished its work. 10 years to change everything. But this time, I had something she didn't expect. Memory, knowledge, and a fury that had followed me through death itself. I spent the first week simply observing, relearning the rhythms of this earlier life. Vivienne was more careful now, her cruelty subtle. She praised me in public and undermined me in private. She suggested foods I was allergic to, activities that somehow always ended in injury, friendships with girls who turned cruel under her influence. At 13, I'd been desperate for her approval, trying to earn the love of the woman who'd replaced my mother. This time, I watched her with clinical detachment, cataloguing every manipulation, every lie, every carefully orchestrated accident. My father was still alive. That almost broke me. He sat at the breakfast table reading the financial news, vital and strong, with 5 years left before the stroke that would kill him. I wanted to warn him, to tell him everything, but I'd learned that lesson in my previous life. The one time I tried to tell him about Vivienne's cruelty, she twisted my words into teenage rebellion. He'd chosen her, believing her tears over my truth. This time, I would gather proof before I spoke. This time, I would be believed. I found the book in her study 3 weeks after my rebirth, hidden behind false classics on the top shelf, wrapped in black silk. The pages were handwritten, recipes and rituals in Vivienne's elegant script, instructions for binding spells, methods for slow poisoning that mimicked natural illness, photographs of my mother, my father, even my grandmother, each marked with symbols I didn't understand but felt in my bones. And there in the back, my own photo as a child, the curse already cast, the poison already begun. I photographed every page with shaking hands, stored the files in 3 separate cloud accounts, and replaced the book exactly as I'd found it. Then I began researching, reading everything I could find about folk magic, sympathetic curses, and their countermeasures. The local library became my sanctuary. I spent hours in the occult section, reading texts that most people dismissed as superstition. But I knew better now. I'd died from magic masquerading as natural causes. I'd been reborn through forces that shouldn't exist according to rational thought. The world was far stranger than most people believed, and I needed to understand its hidden rules if I was going to survive. I learned that curses were constructed like buildings. They had foundations, structures, weak points. Vivienne's magic was traditional, drawn from European folk practices, mixed with something older, darker. She'd built her curses on jealousy and entitlement, feeding them with consistent malice and the belief that she deserved what others had. But every curse had a counter. Every spell could be unravelled or reflected. The key was understanding the underlying principles and having the will to see it through. Vivienne had used our love against us. She'd taken tokens, hair, photographs, personal objects, and twisted them into weapons. But curses were living things. They required maintenance, belief, and the caster's constant intention. And every curse could be reversed, reflected, or redirected. I would need help. Not from my father, who couldn't see past Vivienne's mask. Not from friends my age, who lacked the knowledge I needed. But there were others who understood these old, dark arts. I found Miriam in a shop that didn't advertise, down an alley my classmates would never explore. The windows were dusty, displaying dried herbs and crystals that most people would consider decorative nonsense. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt the difference. The air was thicker here, charged with intention and accumulated power. She was 70, with hands gnarled by arthritis and eyes that saw too much. She looked up from the mortar and pestle she was working, grinding something that smelled of earth and iron, and studied me for a long moment, "You're cursed," she said before I'd spoken a word. "And you know who did it." "Can you teach me?" I asked. "To break it?" "To return it." Something like approval crossed her face. "That's dangerous work, child. The magic you send out comes back threefold." "It's already coming back," I said. "She cursed my entire family. My mother is dead. My father will die in 5 years. I'm being poisoned slowly. If I do nothing, threefold is exactly what I'll get." Miriam studied me for a long moment, her gaze penetrating in a way that made me feel transparent. She was reading something beyond my words, seeing the truth of my death and rebirth, written in whatever spiritual language she understood. Then she nodded. "Twice a week," she said, "after school. Pay me in nothing but the truth. Every truth, even the ones that hurt. That's how we'll build your protection." For 3 years, I lived 2 lives. At home, I was the dutiful stepdaughter, earning good grades, causing no trouble, accepting Vivienne's help with practiced gratitude. I ate the food she prepared, but slipped stomach-settling herbs into my tea afterward. Herbs Miriam had taught me to recognize and use. I wore the jewelry she gifted, but cleansed it with salt water when she wasn't watching, removing whatever intention she'd embedded in the metal. I smiled through every manipulation and stored every cruelty in my memory like ammunition. At Miriam's shop, I learned, not just about curses and protection, but about patience, about precision, about the way magic works through will and symbol, intention and sacrifice. The first lesson was simple: protection before action. Miriam spent 6 months teaching me to shield myself, to build barriers that Vivienne's magic would slide off without her noticing. We used visualization, meditation, physical tokens I could carry. A silver bracelet inscribed with protective symbols, worn on my left wrist where Vivienne never looked. A small bag of herbs sewn into the lining of my school bag, refreshed every new moon. The second lesson was harder, understanding the enemy's methods completely before attempting to counter them. I had to study Vivienne's book, not just to catalogue her crimes, but to understand her magical philosophy, her approach to power, her weaknesses. "Every practitioner leaves a signature," Miriam explained, showing me the patterns in Vivienne's spellwork. "See how she always works during the waning moon, how she favours binding over banishing, how her curses are slow and subtle rather than fast and obvious. These aren't random choices. They tell you how she thinks, what she fears, where she's vulnerable." Vivienne feared exposure above all else. Her magic was secretive, designed to look like natural misfortune. She needed to maintain her image as the perfect wife, the loving stepmother, the gracious society woman. Her power came from being trusted, beloved, above suspicion. That would be the key to breaking her. The third lesson took the longest: constructing a counter-curse that would serve justice without destroying the caster. Miriam was adamant about this. Magic driven purely by revenge would consume me along with its target. But magic driven by the principle of balance, of returning what was sent, could be both effective and sustainable. "A curse reflected is justice," Miriam told me. "But a curse reflected carelessly becomes chaos. You must be specific, you must be certain, and you must be willing to see it through to the end, no matter how terrible that end becomes." I thought of my mother, dead at 35, my father dying before he could see me, graduate, my own body failing, organs shutting down one by one. "I'm certain," I said. By 16, I'd built protections Vivienne couldn't see but certainly felt. The accidents stopped working. The food that should have made me sick left me fine. The spells that should have broken my friendship slid away like water off stone. I watched her confusion turn to frustration, frustration to anger. She pushed harder, grew more reckless. Good. Angry people made mistakes. She started questioning me more, her voice sweet but her eyes calculating. You seem different lately, Catherine. More distant. Is everything all right at school? Everything's fine, I'd say, meeting her gaze steadily. I'm just growing up. And I was. Not just physically, but in ways she couldn't comprehend. Every session with Miriam, every hour spent studying magical theory, every moment of self-discipline strengthened me. I was becoming someone she couldn't touch, couldn't manipulate, couldn't control. My father noticed the change too, but he interpreted it positively. You're becoming so independent, sweetheart, so confident. I'm proud of you. If only he knew what I was becoming confident in. But he couldn't know yet. Vivienne had spent 15 years building her position in his heart and life. One wrong word from me and she'd twist it into evidence of my instability, my jealousy, my teenage rebellion. I documented everything, the ingredients she bought from specialty shops, paying cash so there'd be no credit card trail. I followed her once to a store 3 towns over, watched her purchase dried nightshade, belladonna, and other substances that had no innocent purpose. I photographed the transactions from across the street with a camera Miriam had given me, one that could capture more than just the visible spectrum. I recorded the phases of the moon she worked during, noting the patterns. Waning moon for binding and diminishing, new moon for curses and concealment. She never worked during the waxing or full moon. Those were for growth and revelation, the opposite of her intentions. I listened outside her study door during the private conversations she had late at night, speaking to forces she'd bound with offerings and blood. My recordings captured her voice listing names, my mother's, my father's, mine, along with specific intentions. Weaken her constitution, cloud her judgment, make her dependent. Each piece of evidence was stored in multiple locations, digital files in encrypted cloud accounts, physical copies in a safe deposit box I'd opened under a family friend's name, backup recordings with Miriam. I was building a case that couldn't be destroyed, dismissed, or explained away. And I began the work of building my own curse, not from hatred, though I had plenty, but from justice, from the principle that what you send into the world should return to you, precisely measured and perfectly balanced. Miriam guided me through the construction over 18 months. It was the most complex magical working I'd ever attempted, requiring perfect precision and unwavering focus. The curse must be tied to something she values more than anything, Miriam explained. Not her life. She'd sacrifice that if she thought it would secure her legacy. Not her possessions. Those are just symbols of what she really wants. What does Vivienne value most? I thought about it, reviewing everything I knew about her from both timelines. Her image, how she's seen, the perfect life she's stolen, and the perfection she presents to the world. Exactly. Her reflection. Not the physical mirror image, but the social one. How she appears to others, her reputation, her standing. That's where she's invested her true self. That's where she's most vulnerable. So, we built the curse around that principle. It would activate slowly, triggered by Vivienne's own continued harmful actions. Every time she cast a spell against my family, every time she administered poison, every time she manipulated or lied, the curse would tighten, and it would manifest in the place she'd least expect and most fear, in full public view. The ritual itself took place on the anniversary of my mother's death, 8 years after my rebirth. I was 21, legally an adult, with the resources and freedom Vivienne couldn't easily control. Miriam had prepared a space in the back room of her shop, protected by wards accumulated over decades. The night before my father's scheduled death, the stroke that never came in my first life because I died before witnessing it. I sat across from Vivienne at dinner. She was tense, excited. Whatever she planned was about to come to fruition. This was supposed to be the week my father would die, leaving her, the grieving widow, with complete control of his fortune. "You seem happy, Vivienne?" I said casually. "It's a beautiful evening," she replied. "Sometimes I think about how perfect life has become." "All according to plan?" Her eyes snapped to mine, searching, but I kept my expression innocent, merely curious. "Yes," she said slowly, "according to plan." That night, I performed the ritual Miriam had taught me. It took hours. The gathering of materials, the casting of circles, the careful construction of intention. I used Vivienne's own book as reference. Her own words, her own methods turned back on themselves. I tied the curse not to a photograph or a strand of hair, but to her own reflection, to the face she showed the world, to the image she'd cultivated so carefully. And I specified exactly what would return to her, every pain she'd caused, every loss she'd engineered, every moment of suffering she'd created. Not all at once. That would be too quick, too merciful. But slowly, publicly, undeniably, the curse would feed on her vanity, her pride, her need to be seen as perfect. And it would ensure that everyone would see exactly what she was. The candles burned low, the herbs. You smoked. I spoke the words Miriam had written out for me, each syllable precise and weighted with intention. I felt the moment the curse took hold, like a thread connecting invisibly between my working and Vivienne's carefully constructed life. The connection hummed with potential energy, waiting to discharge. "It's done," Miriam said quietly, watching from the edge of the protective circle. "The rest will unfold according to her own actions. If she stops harming others, the curse will remain dormant. But if she continues..." "She'll continue," I said with certainty. "She can't help herself." My father woke up healthy the next morning. The stroke never came. I heard him whistling in the shower, saw him bound down the stairs with energy he hadn't shown in years. Whatever Vivienne had prepared had simply failed. Vivienne's confusion was visible, poorly hidden behind her coffee cup. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured cream, hands that would soon show the first signs of the curse's physical manifestation. "Are you well, darling?" she asked him, her voice just slightly too high. "You seem unusually energetic." "I feel fantastic," he said, kissing her cheek. "Best sleep I've had in years. Strange. I had the oddest dream that I was supposed to be sick today. But look at me. I might take up jogging again." I watched her mask flicker, watched her wonder what had gone wrong, watched her mental calculations trying to understand why her carefully planned spell had not only failed but seemed to have reversed. She glanced at me across the table, and for just a moment our eyes met with complete understanding. She didn't know the specifics yet, but she felt the shift. The power she'd held was slipping, and somewhere in the back of her mind she was beginning to fear. The first visible sign appeared a week later. Vivienne developed a rash on her hands, angry, red welts that wouldn't heal. Doctors were baffled. Every cream and medication failed. The rash spread slowly up her arms, and no amount of makeup could hide it. "It must be stress," I suggested sweetly when she emerged from yet another dermatologist appointment. "Perhaps you're working too hard on your charity projects." She glared at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She knew, maybe not the specifics, but she felt the connection, recognized the signature of magical work, even if she couldn't identify its source. She began trying counter curses. I felt them, weak and desperate, bouncing off the protections Miriam had taught me to maintain. Each failed attempt seemed to accelerate her decline, as if her own magic was now feeding the curse that consumed her. I graduated high school with honours, accepted into my first choice university on a full academic scholarship. The scholarship I'd lost in my first life came through without issue, along with 3 others I hadn't even applied for. Doors were opening for me that Vivienne had previously managed to seal shut. My father attended the ceremony, healthy and proud, while Vivienne sat beside him in long sleeves despite the summer heat, hiding the rash that now covered her arms. Her smile looked painted on, cracking at the edges. At university, I studied business and finance, preparing to take over my father's company. I also studied law, psychology, and, surprisingly, the history of folk magic and witchcraft prosecution. Every tool I'd need to finish what I'd started. Every weapon I'd need to ensure that when I finally revealed the truth, there would be no escape for her. Vivienne's deterioration was gradual, but relentless. The rash became scars. Her hair, once lustrous and carefully maintained, began to thin. She developed insomnia, lying awake all night, plagued by nightmares she wouldn't describe. Her hands shook when she thought no one was watching. Her reflection in mirrors started showing something different than what others saw, and she began avoiding her own image. But it was the social death that destroyed her most completely. At charity galas, she began saying things she didn't mean to say. Cruel truths slipped out at the worst moments. Insults she'd thought privately emerged publicly. At a fundraiser for children's health, she told the host the event was desperate and poorly planned in front of 50 witnesses. At my father's company dinner, she called his business partner's wife tragic and delusional to her face. The curse was working exactly as designed. Her reflection, how she appeared to others, was cracking, showing the ugliness underneath. She couldn't stop herself. The mask she'd worn for decades was cracking, and the ugliness underneath was leaking through for everyone to see. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she sobbed to my father after one particularly disastrous dinner party. "I don't mean to say these things. It's like someone else is speaking through me." But she did mean them. That was the beauty of the curse. It only revealed what was already there. The thought she'd always thought, the judgment she'd always made, the contempt she'd always felt, they were finally visible. Her true reflection was showing, and it was monstrous. My father, finally, began to see her clearly. The loving wife he'd married was showing a face he'd never witnessed. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. "Maybe you should see someone," he suggested gently. "A therapist. This doesn't seem like you." "It isn't me," she screamed, then covered her mouth in horror. But the damage was done. She was unraveling, and everyone could see it. I was 21 when I staged the final revelation. It was my father's 65th birthday party, held at our family estate, with 200 guests from every corner of his life. Business associates, old friends, family members, politicians, charity leaders, everyone who mattered in our city. Vivienne had planned something special for that night. I'd found the materials in her study, recognised the ritual. She intended to bind my father's legacy to her permanently, ensuring that after his natural death, which she'd scheduled for some time in the next year, everything he'd built would be legally and magically hers. His business would go to her, his fortune would be hers, even his reputation would become hers to control. It would be the ultimate theft, the final victory. I let her prepare, let her gather her ingredients, cast her circle in the garden house under the full moon. Let her believe she still had power. Then, in front of everyone, I played the recordings. The screens I'd installed for the birthday tribute video came to life, but instead of sentimental family memories, they showed Vivienne's true face. Her confessions to empty rooms, thinking she was alone. Her rituals recorded by hidden cameras I'd installed over years. Her curses, her methods, her gleeful discussions of my mother's death, my father's planned demise, my own slow poisoning. The guests watched in horrified silence as Vivienne's true self played out in high definition. Her voice describing how she'd killed my mother with patient magic and careful poison. She trusted me completely. That made it so easy. A little belladonna in her tea, a binding curse on her heart. She died thinking we were sisters. How she'd cultivated my father's love while planning his death. He'll die believing I loved him. That's the beautiful part. He'll never know he was just a means to an end. How she tortured me for years with small cruelties and supernatural malice. Catherine is like her mother, too bright, too loved, but I'm dimming that light slowly. By the time I'm done, she'll be nothing. A shadow, a ghost, and then not even that. And then came the evidence I'd gathered over 8 years. Receipts for unusual herbs and ritual objects carefully documented. Medical records showing the toxins in my childhood blood work, confirmed by 3 independent laboratories. Testimony from Miriam confirming the type of curse work involved, delivered via video with the calm authority of an expert witness. And finally, photographs of Vivienne's own spellbook, every page, every curse, every victim catalogued in her elegant handwriting. The presentation lasted 20 minutes. 20 minutes of undeniable truth. 20 minutes that destroyed a lifetime of lies. Vivienne stood frozen in the centre of the ballroom, her face a mask of horror. She tried to speak, but nothing came out except a strangled sound. The curse I tied to her reflection was working perfectly. In this moment, with everyone watching, she couldn't hide, couldn't lie, couldn't manipulate. Her skin, which she'd covered with layers of expensive makeup, began to show its true state, scarred, aged, decaying from the inside out. Her hair, teased and sprayed into place, fell limp and lifeless. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, showed only animal panic. "Catherine," she finally gasped, you don't understand. I loved you. I loved all of you." The room remained silent, every eye fixed on the spectacle of her disintegration. "You loved what we represented," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You loved what you could take from us. But love? You don't know what that word means." I turned to my father, who sat white-faced in his chair, aged a decade in minutes. "She killed Mum," I said quietly. "She was planning to kill you. She's been poisoning me since I was 5 years old. Everything I've shown you tonight is true, and I have legal documentation for all of it. The police are waiting outside. It's your choice whether I call them in." My father looked at Vivienne. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. The woman he'd married, who he'd trusted with his life and his child. The monster wearing a human face. His voice, when it came, was broken. "Call them." Vivienne's arrest was quiet, professional. The guests parted like water as the officers led her out, her wrists bound in handcuffs that couldn't hold half the things she'd bound in her lifetime. She didn't look at anyone, didn't speak. The mask had finally shattered completely, and there was nothing left underneath but empty horror. The trial was sensational. Media descended on our city like locusts, hungry for every detail of the black magic stepmother case. The prosecution had everything: the recordings, the physical evidence, the testimonies of experts who confirmed the type of poison found in my childhood. Medical records matched herbs found in Vivienne's possession. They had Miriam's testimony about the curse work, delivered matter-of-factly in a way that made even skeptics pause. But it was my testimony that sealed her fate. I sat in the witness stand for 3 days, recounting every manipulation, every cruelty, every moment of calculated evil. I spoke calmly, precisely, without dramatics or tears. I presented the facts like the business major I'd become, and the jury listened with growing horror. I described waking up at 13 with memories of my death. I explained how I'd spent 8 years gathering evidence, learning protection magic, and building a case that couldn't be dismissed. I showed them the physical scars from accidents Vivienne had arranged. I walked them through the medical records, documenting chronic low-level poisoning that doctors had attributed to a weak constitution. Vivienne's defense tried to paint me as a disturbed young woman, a vengeful stepdaughter with an overactive imagination and possible psychotic delusions. But they couldn't explain the physical evidence, couldn't explain the poisons, the ritual materials, the recorded confessions in Vivienne's own voice. The prosecution called it murder and attempted murder, conspiracy and fraud, elder abuse and child endangerment. They called it the cold-blooded elimination of a family for financial gain. I called it exactly what it was. Black magic twisted into a weapon, used by someone who valued power over human life. The jury took 4 hours to convict on all counts. But the legal consequences were almost irrelevant compared to what the curse delivered, because I'd tied it to Vivienne's reflection, to how she was seen, to her reputation, to the face she showed the world. The curse ensured that her fall was spectacularly public. Her society friends abandoned her immediately. The charities she'd chaired removed her name from their boards and scrubbed her from their websites. The magazines that had featured her as a philanthropist and style icon ran exposés about her crimes. Every photograph ever taken of her at a gala, every interview where she discussed family values and maternal love, was now recontextualized as evidence of her monstrous deception. The curse was showing her true reflection everywhere, and it was unbearable. In prison, the physical deterioration accelerated. The woman who'd been so beautiful, so polished, so perfect, aged rapidly. Her hair went white within 6 months. Her skin became paper-thin, showing every vein and bone beneath. The rash that had started on her hand spread across her entire body, a visible mark of internal decay. Other inmates avoided her. Guards reported that she talked to shadows, argued with reflections that didn't match her movements. The curse had taken root so deeply that the boundary between magic and madness had dissolved. She lasted 3 years before her body gave out, failing in the same gradual way she'd engineered for me, organs shutting down one by one. The doctors called it a rare autoimmune disorder, complicated by severe psychological trauma. The prisoners called it divine justice. The guards whispered about curses and karma. I called it completion. I visited her once, 2 weeks before she died. She was in the prison hospital, restrained to prevent self-harm, barely recognizable. The woman who'd been so beautiful, so elegant, so perfectly constructed, was now a skeleton wrapped in scarred skin. Her eyes were the only thing that still looked human, and they held a terrible awareness. When she saw me, something like recognition sparked in her clouded eyes. "You cursed me," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "No," I said calmly, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "I simply returned what you sent out. Every spell you cast, every poison you administered, every curse you whispered, all of it came back to you, exactly as it should have. That's not my curse, Vivienne. That's balance." "Please," she whispered, tears tracking down her ruined face. "Make it stop. I'll confess everything. I'll tell everyone what I did. Just make it stop." "You already confessed everything. The whole world knows what you did, and it changes nothing." I thought of my mother dying at 35 while Vivienne hummed her tune. I thought of my father, targeted for death to clear her path to his fortune. I thought of my own childhood, poisoned and cursed and systematically destroyed. You made it stop for my mother, I said. You tried to make it stop for me. Why should I extend mercy you never showed? She had no answer, just sobs that shook her skeletal frame. I stood, preparing to leave, then paused at the door. The curse ends when you do, I told her. That's the only mercy you'll get. It won't follow you beyond death. Whatever judgment you face next is between you and forces much older than either of us. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you're suffering. But you're not sorry for what you did. If you could go back with the knowledge that you'd succeed, you'd do it all again. The truth of that hung in the air between us. We both knew I was right. She died on a Tuesday, alone, unmourned, except by the prosecuting attorney who saw her conviction as a career highlight. There was no funeral, no one to claim the body. The state cremated her, and her ashes went into an unmarked plot in the prison cemetery. My father took years to recover from the betrayal, the revelation that his second marriage had been a calculated trap from the beginning. We rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. He sold the estate, too many ghosts, too many memories of Vivienne's false smiles, and we bought a smaller place together, filled with light and windows and no space for shadows to hide. We talked about my mother for the first time in years. He told me stories I'd never heard, showed me photographs I'd never seen. We mourned her properly finally, without Vivienne's poison in the air. He apologised over and over for not seeing what was happening, for choosing Vivienne's word over mine, for not protecting me. I should have known, he said one evening, his voice heavy with guilt. A father should know when his child is in danger. She was good at hiding, I told him. She fooled everyone. That was her talent. But privately, I wondered if he could have known, if some part of him had seen the truth and chosen not to look. It was easier to believe in the happy second marriage than to acknowledge he'd brought a monster into our home. I forgave him anyway. Holding onto that anger would have given Vivienne one more victory, and I was done letting her win anything. He lived another 15 years, healthy and clear-eyed, before dying peacefully in his sleep at 80. Natural causes, the doctors said, just old age and a body ready to rest. I sat with him at the end, holding his hand, and his last words were about my mother. Tell her I never stopped loving her, he whispered. Tell her I'm sorry I forgot that for a while. I will, I promised. I inherited everything, the company, the remaining fortune, the legacy that Vivienne had tried to steal. I expanded my father's business, using the same strategic patience I'd learned from Miriam, the same careful planning I'd used to dismantle my stepmother's curse. But I also used it for something Vivienne never understood: creation instead of destruction. I established scholarships for children who'd lost parents. I funded research into environmental toxins and rare poisons. I donated to organisations that supported survivors of family abuse and domestic violence. I created a foundation in my mother's name that did real good in the world. I built something good from the ashes of her evil. Not to redeem her, she was beyond redemption, but to prove that her attempts to destroy me had instead forged something stronger. Miriam lived to 93, passing quietly in her sleep with her shop full of herbs and her knowledge passed down to careful students. I sat with her at the end, holding her gnarled hand, this woman who taught me to protect myself when no one else could. You did well, she told me, her voice faint but steady. The curse served justice, not vengeance. That's the difference that matters. It felt like vengeance sometimes, I admitted. Watching her suffer, part of me enjoyed it. Of course you did. You're human. But enjoying justice isn't the same as pursuing cruelty. Vivienne pursued cruelty. You pursued balance. Never forget that distinction. I won't. Good. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. And Catherine, your mother would be proud of you, not just for surviving, but for how you survived, for what you built from the ruins. Those words stayed with me long after she was gone. I was 35, the age my mother died, when I finally scattered her ashes at the beach she'd loved. I'd carried them with me for years, waiting for the right moment. My father's ashes were already there, mixed with the sand and sea. I got him back for you, I told her, speaking to the wind and waves. I got us 15 more years, and I made sure she could never hurt anyone else. The ocean didn't answer, but the sun broke through the clouds, and for a moment, I felt something like peace. I never married. The fiancé from my first life had been another of Vivienne's manipulations, another trap designed to isolate and control me. In this life, I built different relationships, partnerships based on honesty, friendships rooted in trust, connections that required no magic to maintain. I also never had children. The thought of someone inheriting my story, of passing down pain or legacy or the knowledge of what I'd done, felt too heavy. Instead, I became a mentor to others who'd survived family betrayal, who understood that sometimes love was the most dangerous weapon, and trust the deepest wound. I'm 60 now, the age my father was when Vivienne planned his death. I run the family company from an office that overlooks the city, surrounded by photographs of the people I've loved and the life I've built. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I'm any different from her. I used magic to cause suffering. I watched someone deteriorate and die by my design. I took satisfaction in her downfall. But then I remember the choice I made. I didn't target innocence. I didn't attack out of jealousy or greed. I simply returned what was sent, reflected the curse back to its origin, and ensured that justice, however dark, was served. Vivienne chose to feed on others, to fill the emptiness inside her. I chose to build something lasting from the ruins of her destruction. That difference, I've decided, is everything. The photograph that started it all, my fiancé's betrayal, the final manipulation before my death in that other timeline, sits in my desk drawer now, a reminder of what didn't happen this time. In this life, I saw through his false charm, early recognized Vivienne's hand in pushing us together, and walked away before any damage was done. He married someone else, had 3 children, got divorced twice. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in another state. Vivienne's curse had touched him too, in smaller ways, but he'd survived by being insignificant enough not to fully invest in. The curse I tied to her hadn't spread to her other victims. I'd been specific about that, learned from Miriam to target precisely. Only Vivienne suffered the return. Only Vivienne paid the price. Everyone else simply woke up from her influence and had to rebuild their lives from whatever wreckage she'd left behind. Some managed, some didn't. But at least they had the chance to try. I keep Vivienne's spellbook in a safe behind a painting in my office, not to use, but to remember. To understand that knowledge itself isn't evil. It's the intention behind the casting, the choice of how to use power. And I keep my mother's picture on my desk, young and smiling, frozen at 33, 2 years younger than she'd lived to be. I talk to her sometimes, tell her about the company, about the good work we're doing, about the justice I finally delivered. I don't know if she hears. I don't know if there's anything beyond death but silence and darkness. But I like to imagine that somewhere, somehow, she knows I kept my promise. I didn't let Vivienne win. I didn't become a victim. I didn't let evil go unpunished. I survived. I succeeded. and I made sure the world saw her suffer. Not because I wanted revenge, though I won't pretend I didn't enjoy watching her fall, but because some people need to be stopped, some curses need to be broken, some justice needs to be served publicly, undeniably, so that everyone knows what happens when you try to destroy others, to build yourself. My mother used to tell me that light casts shadows, but shadows can't exist without light. For years I thought I understood what she meant, that good and evil defined each other, that one couldn't exist without the other. But now I understand differently. The shadow isn't evil. It's just the shape of something standing in the light. Vivienne spent her life creating shadows, casting darkness over everyone she envied. But she was never the darkness itself, just emptiness blocking the sun. When I removed her, the light remained. It had always been there, just waiting for the obstacle to fall. I didn't destroy her. I simply stepped aside and let her destroy herself with the same weapon she'd used against others. The curse I tied to her wasn't creative or original. It was just a mirror reflecting her own actions back at perfect scale. She cursed herself the moment she chose to curse others. I just made sure everyone could see it. The city lights are coming on now. Thousands of windows glowing in the evening dark. Each one represents a life, a story, choices made and consequences lived. Somewhere out there, someone is casting their first curse, thinking they can control the outcome. Somewhere else, someone is receiving that curse and doesn't yet know they're in a battle for survival. And somewhere, someone is learning, like I did, that the strongest magic is patience, precision, and the absolute certainty that what goes around must, eventually, come back around. I'm at peace with what I've done. The curse is finished, the balance restored. Vivienne's shadow is gone, and the light that remains is mine to shape as I choose. That's not revenge. That's not even justice, really. It's simply the truth, that I didn't destroy her. I outgrew her, and in the end, my victory wasn't in watching her suffer. It was in becoming someone she could never touch again.